And with that, Andreas, I would say we kick it
Yeah,
off, right? So,
sure.
um, welcome to to the Change Pioneers OD Quarterly, everybody. My name is Bernd Zimmermann. I'm one of the managing partners with Change Pioneers. The other one, Tobias, is also here in the audience, and with me, especially today, is Andreas Müller, the head of Change Pioneers USA. And Andreas is the former global CEO of Nora Systems, former Freudenberg Building Systems, which was and maybe is USA largest rubber flooring manufacturer with more than 1,100 employees. And I think you had a revenue of more than 300 million dollar worldwide, US dollar. So Andrea is really expert in leading teams, but also now as a coach, as a team developer, and as a certified change manager, he is helping to consult clients in these areas. Um, and today in this OD Quarterly, we mainly will have two parts. So in the first part, Andreas will share his experience as an executive, but also as a team coach with regard to team excellence. And in the second part, Andreas and I will together show you the Change Pioneer framework to team excellence and our new self-assessment that we have out there. Um, and yeah, with that said, or before I hand over to you, Andreas, quickly, who is Change Pioneers? If you don't know it by yet, we are a holistic training and consulting ecosystem for organizational development. So our passion is to develop people, teams, and organization through the means of organizational development and leadership development and team development. And we do that because this is our way to help to create a sustainable tomorrow in terms of social sustainability, healthiness, mindfulness, but also maybe ecological sustainability of the organizations themselves. And yeah, we are based in experience and we are based in science, and especially science comes from Dr. Tobias Reisbeck, our other managing partner, who holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the Max Planck Institute. And we are organized as an ecosystem, which means we believe in the power of treating each other on eye level. So that is why we do not only have customers, but we have peer customers, as well as we have peer partners and peer consultants. And there are more than 30 peer consultants all over the world, from Shanghai over to Switzerland, Netherlands to the US. And with these OD quarterlies, we want to bring fresh impulses in the area of organizational development. So again, org design, change management, team and leadership development to our ecosystem. And with today's OD Quarterly, I think we will focus on a very important topic, which I experienced in my many years as being a leader. I was with UniCredit, I was with Siemens, but also working there internally or now externally with our customers, with our peer customers together. So, and the interesting topic today will be, how do you ensure that you're just not vertically aligned in your leadership teams, which means everybody knows his job to be done in his functional responsibility, but how do you create a vertical alignment within your leadership team? And Andreas, over to you, and I bet you have heaps of experience how to do that, and you brought a very interesting question with you.
Yes, I think you can also see it on the screen. And I don't know if any of you also participated in the LinkedIn questionnaire about the question, what are you getting paid for? I think that's for me a very intriguing questions. I always asked our clients, and when you don't give them here the choices between deliver bottom line results and enable your leadership team to achieve, if you don't give them the second part here, in many cases I saw that they mentioned generating profit, creating sales, achieving deadlines. Uh, and then we get to the point, I said, that's the result. That's not, that's really, but what are you doing to get there? Sure, when you give them the choices here between the two, I would see then some people pick I call it the politically correct answer. Yes, sure, I enable my leadership team to achieve the results. But I always say, okay, does your action, what you're really doing, really reflect that? And in many cases, and I was part of it. Bernd mentioned it. I was a global CEO for an organization, and the company was owned by private equity. So, which is, yeah, the same, similar, sometimes better, sometimes worse than being listed on the stock market, because private equity financial investors are focused on the numbers and they want to turn over the company within 3 to 5 years. So it's all about the numbers and the results. And sometimes and same thing happened to me, you get caught up in the numbers, achieving the budget, having the budget compliance from your leadership team. And obviously you work harder. And then when you realize the results are not coming, what do? You establish new additional KPIs, and the list of KPIs is just growing. But does it change the result? In my case, it didn't. What's the next step then? And then you look at your team, then you change out low performers. Then you change out your management team. And I've seen it with some of our clients now. They changed their entire management team. And did it change the results? In some cases it does, but in many cases it doesn't. And then you have to I had my quarterly meetings, and who's setting the agenda? I, as a CEO, was setting the agenda, and everybody was complaining. Another quarterly meeting, it's really boring. Why are we doing it? And then I realized that really something has to change, and not the individuals, the team. And then what I did then said, you guys determine the agenda. And I'm no longer the one always standing up front and being the entertainer, and also determine what does the really leadership mean for us. And how do I know that I have a winning team? And that's when I realized I don't really have a winning team. Was the team I had, they all liked each other. We had a great vision and mission and strategy. But I got to the point where if we all like each other, we know each other for a long time, and we have a great strategy or vision or mission, but we never really achieve our results, I said, then by definition, we are not a good team. It's the same like a sports team. They say, hey, we all like each other, we are all good, we all have the same ambitions, but we are in the bottom of the draw. By definition, it's not a good team. So that's the reason I realized, and that's what I'm now trying to save others, not making the same mistakes. Number one, focusing on the results. And number two, when you think about your team, you always just think about the individuals. Huh? And what do they really do to develop their team, their leadership teams? Not individuals, the leadership team. In most cases, when you talk about employee advancements, potential development, it's in many cases, it's just always about the individual, not about the team. And that's also when we sold the company to one of the major players in the US, based in Atlanta. And one of the reasons they said they bought the company was based on the people and the processes. So, and I think this was also then a testament that this increases the value of an organization. Because at the end of the day, with any kind of merger, acquisitions and things like that. At the end of the day, you buy the people and the processes which are established there. And that's where when I realized we really need help. And that's when we hired help and organizations like Change Pioneers who are able to help. And I realize the same thing now with my clients. And to give you some examples, I was just an observer in a management meeting for a big French organization here in the US. They were all talking about their internal challenges, and they were all internally focused. Even that one of their statements says, we are empower the team and we are customer focused. All discussions were about the internal challenge in this department, that's not working, that's not working. Then all of a sudden the CEO stood up and said, hey guys, what did I do or did not do that you guys have not fixed these issues? And all of a sudden the room got very quiet. And then he was looking for feedback. And then one guy was brave enough to answer it. And he said, we are all too busy. But you guys all think that this was the correct answer? And afterwards, when we had our briefing discussion, and he was very unhappy and said, this cannot be the reason. He said, no, that's for me just an excuse. The same like we discussed, we have to communicate better, or we have to train our people better. But then you realize that this is more a lack of leadership and holding each other accountable. And another example for another client, it was similar. They acquired a company and did multiple communications. And they said, Andreas, as a change manager, can you help us? And I think we have to communicate better and more. So that's really that the people really get the information and get the value out of it and see all the good things we are doing. And I think you all, have you ever heard of an organization where they're not saying we have to communicate more or better? That's what you have with any organization. You can always do that. But communication is for me a two-way street. The same like people say, okay, we have to train our people. Training, for me, the difference between training and learning. And the same thing was true here. People did not read emails, do not take attention, better communication, but the same thing was true here, is the lack of ownership. And ownership between the different departments. And what does ownership really mean? It means accountability. And how do you get the accountability? First, you have to develop the trust, be vulnerable, ask for help. And I think we all have seen people where we think they need help, but the culture isn't there to admit that they need help, which is sometimes maybe seen as a sign of weakness. And to build the trust, when you have the trust, then you can have the conflicts, then the commitment, and then the accountability. And that's the reason I think what Bernd will show later on is, I always ask, think about how your team looks like and how would you describe the team you would love to have to be successful with your organization. And think about more the behavior, no? It's not just the what, the how. And the assessment, which Bernd will explain later on, I think always it's not a diagnostic tool, it's a dialogue tool, which triggers and enables in-depth discussion. And that's how I realized that even if you have to deliver the numbers, we all know it, that you cannot do it alone, and you look at your team. But I always looked at the team as a group of individuals, and not as a really realistic team, a cohesive team. That's the only way you able to achieve the numbers, and then you're able to really enable your management team to deliver the results, and it's also much more fun. Any questions from the audience? Comments?
Maybe Mark, I saw Mark nodding when you said, Andreas, when you said often companies put a lot of effort in developing people, but not so much in developing teams. I don't know, Mark, if my observation was right, and if you want to explain a little bit why you nodded.
Your observation was very right. I nodded because I completely agree. I think there's a lot of emphasis put on the individual as leader. And if you look at trainings, very much of it's designed as leader of self, leader of others, leader of team, but that generally tends to be more about how do I give feedback, how do I set goals, how do I do a performance review, as opposed to the go all the way back. How do I design a team that is going to be effective in delivering the work that the team needs to deliver? How am I going to develop the work practices, the interdependencies, the stakeholder engagement, all of that? So, and what my experience has been, you don't see a lot of that in leadership development programs. There's very little about how do I build and develop a team, and then how do I create a team of teams environment, so the collaboration between teams across an organization. So that's why I was nodding fervently.
Yeah, correct. And it's exactly correct what you said. And I experienced it firsthand. It was okay. Now I created my own management team. Sometimes when you get promoted, you inherit a team. All of a sudden they say, oh yeah, now I created my own, but they didn't really create a team. They just created a group of individuals. Any other comments?
Yeah, maybe a quick one, Martin, here. So I would agree as well that there is an imbalance with the focus being mainly on the individual versus the team. I'm not so sure that it's completely ignored or a really big gap in leadership development programs, because I remember going through a lot of them that there was always a portion where, learning about teams, composition, the different frameworks that are around. I think the lack, like with so many trainings, is actually putting it in practice, that because you're sent to a training typically as an individual and you're meeting with different leaders, different peers that you don't work with in your day-to-day, it all remains artificial and a little bit abstract, which is always then the challenge of transfer what you learn to your actual teams. And particularly with this kind of focus, I don't think that organizations, once you're back trying to apply what you learn, have a good or substantial support system that you can rely on. So that's where I agree that there's actually a gap, as you're pretty much left alone with trying out what you learn. And typically the day-to-day then gets the upper hand pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think that one other question I always ask the leadership team sometimes is, what is the most important team for you? And in most cases, the answer is, if I asked the head of sales or whatever, they always say their team, which means all the people reporting to them. And it's never the group in that room. then they consider that as the most important team for them. It's always their team, which fosters and in some cases creates also a silo thinking, and it doesn't enable really this management team to really work together as a team, as the most important team. If they don't see their colleague from the other department or other division as their most important team member.
Wow, no objections. I would have thought people would say, whoa, can you say that this crystal clear? I'm not sure. Other remarks, or what are you witnessing, or would you agree that this kind of shared responsibility, creating the shared responsibility is needed? And if yes, maybe, I don't know how to do it.
Or how have you solved the issue? Or addressed it, let's call it. Or talk, maybe addressed it.
I might add something. I just started to work with the leadership team, and I made small movements. I started to rename the email Verteiler. How does it called? The email group.
Distribution.
Yeah, the distribution list. Thank you. I renamed. It was the first step. I renamed the distribution list, and I said it's called leadership team now, and because I want to build it, and so some of them came back and said, "Oh, I'm interested to hear what you're planning," and during the training sessions or we also implemented a methodology called collegial consulting. So they learned in the training how to do a collegial consulting in 45 minutes. So we established this in a permanent setting. Once a month or every 2 months, they can voluntarily meet for this collegial consulting. It's just a small group now. It's growing, and I'm trying to scale it up. And we had our first meeting as a leadership team last week when we had been presented something from the management, the vision and mission had been presented, and I worked with the leadership team again, and they asked for having more platforms to work with each other, to work on the strategy together. So they themselves had a good experience in having a dialogue, discussing things, and so it's just a way on giving them a platform and the possibility to meet and talk and have a dialogue. These are the small steps, but I'm at the very beginning, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Regina.
And for me, at the beginning, I wasn't really sure I didn't even know if I have a high-performing team or not. Well, that's the other question. Do we know if we have a high-performing team, and how do we determine it?
I put my hand up, but I'll jump into the silence because I didn't want to kind of dominate some of the conversation. It's a great question. It's the one that I get asked a lot when I'm with teams. When you say, well, you're talking about high-performing teams, what is a high-performing team? What I've found is that most of the framework models that, if you use one as part of an assessment, make the assumption that if you have the inputs in place, then de facto you have a high-performing team. So trust could be seen as an input. Having a purpose is an input. Having ways of working are inputs, but that's not a definition of a high-performing team, because you can have those and still be dysfunctional and not deliver. So it's why I'm drawn to the work of Richard Hackman and Ruth Wagaman, who have, their work looks at 3 determinants of high-performing teams. First of all, is the team delivering what the stakeholders expect it to deliver?
Yeah.
Does teams exist to do work, to deliver? That's the first. The second is, are members satisfied being members of this team? And member satisfaction here is measured or looked at through growth and development and learning. So I'm becoming a better person by being a part of this team. And the third looks at the team itself, which is the team constantly renewing itself in terms of its work practices and norms and expectations to meet changing contexts and situations? And that's how that's how they look at it. And I've used that, and that seems to resonate with leaders when you spell it out that way. They go, oh yeah. And it also drives it back to the work. Teams exist to do work, and a lot of the models don't always talk about the output. A bit like the question you've got here, they don't talk about the output.
Yeah.
They talk about the input or the processes. I'll put my hand down now.
Yeah, great comment. But do you also see, Mark, that organizations are willing and open to have these conversations? And also that you mentioned the word trust, that the trust level is there to really have this discussion and go through that analysis with the risk of determine we are not a high performing.
Not all, no. So I find I've either got an enlightened leader who's willing to have that reflection of their own team and have that dialogue and conversation about their own team, but they're then operating in isolation, and that makes it difficult for them to have impact. And then you have a few organizations who do want to look across the system and then have teams across the system self-assess with an aim of improving their overall performance. But that is definitely in the minority.
Yeah, I agree.
And Andreas, we have from Anup coming, I think, very interesting comment in the chat. And hi, Anup, great to see you here. I don't know if either you want to talk about it, Anup. Otherwise, I can read it out if you want.
Hey, Bernd, you can just read it out.
No, I found it interesting to say your observation is or was and is probably that high-performing teams do not want to work in bad markets or restructuring. I know that also from sports team, everybody wants to be with the champion and so on. But then the second piece, failure is a reality, and organizations are ready to sacrifice the team versus acknowledge that they have a bad product or high competitiveness. And this sacrificing the team, I think, Andreas, you also mentioned sacrificing the individual of a team if he or she does not perform. But I think also sacrificing a team is something that we see in organizations.
Yes. And I think another thing what you also see in some cases when we are very successful, pick a market. In this specific market, we are very successful because we have, then when you ask why, we have a great leader there, we have a great team. And then when you talk about a market where the organization is not successful, then you sometimes get the answer, oh, We don't have the right solutions. Very competitive market. So on one hand, when we are successful, it's all about our people and our teams, huh? Which is, I would totally agree. But in the case where we are not successful, we are looking somewhere else. Huh? We're looking at the market, the solutions. So we are not looking at the same. Maybe we are not successful there because we don't have the right team, or we don't have the correct leader in place. In my opinion, it has to be, maybe that's a German, maybe it has to be one or the other. No, you cannot pick. You cannot pick and choose. In the successful part, we have great people, huh? And if we are not successful, it's all the circumstances around us which are against us. Huh?
I would agree with you. Worked across different cultures. There's an aspect of culture on leadership which is different. However, I feel that this conversation has to be a little more nuanced because every organization is different in terms of setup, leadership, culture, geography, headquarters. There's a lot of influence from headquarters and markets. I spent most of my time in healthcare where traditionally nothing changes for a long time, and you can have lots of strategies for 5 years, 10 years, and in the end, you kind of meet them because nothing has changed. But in the last 5 to 7 years, I'm observing as more and more software starts getting embedded into applications and the internet gets more and more pervasive, the ability for the organization to rapidly see what's happening in the market and how their leadership responds to it, it's kind of becoming more real time. There's just not enough time to kind of have these big planning sessions and then kind of hold on to it, even if the ship is sinking, because who's going to make a call on that? Because if you make a call on that, say the strategy is wrong, you get fired. I see a lot of these young generation leaders are more looking at real-time data, having real-time conversation, tweaking the strategy, in real time, and doing kind of like agile experimentations along with the team to figure out what's the best way to set up. I mean, even after COVID, I've seen organizations, debating whether you should be all at home, hybrid, you need to work in office. And I look at organizations who argue about it, and I look at organizations trying different experiments. We have a lot of people in this area. Let's have an office. Let's see how many people come. If it doesn't work, we shut it down. So I don't know what your thoughts are, because it's kind of difficult to kind of nail something and say, this is how it has to work. I mean, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you that the decisions, what makes it even more difficult or complex is the information is changing rapidly, and which means leadership teams also have to adjust and make decisions on the go, agile, more quickly than they ever had to do it before. And I think, in my opinion, it puts an even bigger importance or strain on the leadership team to perform at a totally different level. And in addition to it, when they work remotely.
Yeah. Not just different level, but I think because if you're kind of real time, you have to be more authentic, because one day you say something, next day the data changes, you have to change your strategy. So, that's another cultural thing. I feel the next generation leaders who kind of get it more intuitively. But some older organizations have to figure that out. You made this decision, but that's what the data said, and now the market changed, so you change some of your strategy. So it's not a bad thing if the strategy changes because the market changed.
Yeah. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
Sabina, I think, is raising her hand.
Yes.
And throwing
Yes,
hearts and nodding.
yeah, just
Hi, Sabina.
using the digital tools here to interact. Now, two things really resonated. Is what you said before, Andreas, is that when you ask the leaders who is your team, that it's the own team, and
Correct.
they do not consider this leadership team as team number one. Yeah, or so I think that's definitely one essential topic to address and to get right, because the culture starts going down if you get it right on that team number one level. And the other question that I've had for quite some time, and now even more with all this acceleration, higher speed, and virtual world, if hierarchies are still the right form for organizations, or if we do not need something else, more self-organized and more ecosystem, and more giving the empowerment to teams who would make their decisions. And the role of the leader is more the facilitator, the mentor, making sure that people can work, rather than the one giving targets and controlling and measuring. This, I think, just really slows us down. It's my perception.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of tapping into what you said, Anup, with information changes all the time. Yeah, it's difficult to say this is our 3-year strategy, and I will control you, and you have to do budgets, and you need your headcount planning if things evolve so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to comment on your point of titles and leader. Slowly, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Siemens, so I have that Kool-Aid in my body. So very structured process, strategy, plan buying, and everything. It worked very well. But now when I'm in the real world and now I look at companies, it's very different. So when I observe some companies, they don't have titles, because they say, what's the use of a title? You should just be named by the team you belong to, because you're all the same. And so then suddenly, like, I am part of head of procurement, and they have like procurement people. I'm an analyst. So I thought that was like, first I thought that was stupid. Then I thought that was interesting, because it removes the ego out of this whole thing, right? And the incentives are salary, other things. So that thing I found very interesting, because titles have different connotations across different cultures. For some cultures, title is very important because that's who you are. And for some cultures, it doesn't matter. Money is more important. So that kind of removed the barrier across cultures. The other thing, the CEO, this concept of CEO as a leader, is kind of getting broken down in ecosystems, because I don't know how to say this, each team could be an organization in the team of teams, right? And there's a leader there. And how they interact with each other becomes more critical. And sometimes you don't even see that happening, because there's no physical interaction happening. It's just data flowing through one system to the other. So I think there are like gaps in leadership in terms of how those organizations are going to run. And I see in big organizations, some pieces have become modern and some pieces are still old. And you have just one leadership strategy. And how do you know if somebody is doing well or somebody is doing badly? You don't know, because the decline is so slow that you don't see that. You're losing like 1% market share every year. You think, next year I'm going to get it back, and 10 years pass. And then somebody decides, you know what, it's too bad, sell.
We have a raised hand by Martin, but I don't know, Andreas, do you want to respond or should we?
No, let's try. I would say let Martin go. Maybe Martin has is adding to it, or
Yeah, thanks. I really like what you brought up, Anoop, and I actually have like a question, because for me it's a dilemma with pro and cons, and I haven't really figured out a kind of a nice working blueprint to apply. When you talked about when you shared the example about titles and hierarchies, right? Like removing it completely versus the traditional system. And I love that you mentioned the Siemens background. I spent 10 years with the company as well, so I'm very familiar with what you're probably referring to. But for me, I mean, it has pros and cons, right? So titles and org charts are just, visualization of hierarchies, also provide a lot of orientation. It's like literally navigation maps for people to find their way around and get a mental map of how processes, decisions, procedures work, or at least which parts of the organizations are involved. So there's a lot of benefit, and we use that in everyday life. We all have our patterns, frameworks. Sometimes there are biases and stereotypes, but it helps us make sense of the world around us. And I think it's also true with titles and organizations in the business context. On the other hand, the downside being, I think that's what you meant, the orientation is offset by limitations, because we are immediately then contained and limited with our understanding applying those patterns. So I had a couple of examples where people were hired into an organization, became a title, and they were pretty much defined and perceived as what the title was, or the expectation of the title. And there was so much potential with the background that these people had, just not recognized, not overlooked, because it was not part of the title they had, right? So everybody comes with a lot of experience, and it's not always represented in there. And the same is with hierarchies. Today's organization obviously have more complex relationships, matrices. So my question, I think, to this group is, while I see the pros and cons of both, I think there is no one size fits all. What is your experience? How to make sure that you leverage the pros, right, with the orientation, the guidance, the quicker onboarding, understanding, while minimizing the cons, which is the limitation in really understanding the potential, the openness to not being bound by our mental frameworks that we apply with looking at an org chart or title, and not think beyond that.
So let me clarify myself, just to make sure that we're on the same page here. I did not mean not having any titles. I'm just saying, what type of titles should it have? Because if you're running a team, then you need to represent your team, right? The problem is we come from this industrial age of titles. We need a CEO and a hierarchy, and then we try to fit a team into that model, director, senior director. And the moment you get the title of senior director, you say, and put it on your CV, you say, I was director, I was senior director, so I need more pay, I need more people reporting to me. And the work doesn't get done. And when you're making teams, you need people with different experiences to be working together, because there's no guarantee that a vice president is going to get stuff done. Yeah.
Agree.
So like when you're building a team of teams, and each team has input and an output, and you kind of start thinking about it and say, like, what role do you play here? How are you working in the team? How are you going to work with a team of teams? How are those incentives going to work? Because your job's not getting done because some piece which needs to get executed, the competency lies in some other team, right? And I've seen a lot of organizations suffer because these silos can't be broken. They just built. Yeah. And one of the persons who actually broke those silos was Nadella from Microsoft. He had no clue. He came out from the blue, right? He was a guy who was running the cloud services. He had a business which was losing money, but he came in and said, we're going to focus on the cloud. It doesn't matter how much money you make in the traditional office space, the office business, right? And he was able to transform. He changed the culture because he started measuring something different.
And I think it's what you also mentioned is, I think there was a different maturity level of different organizations.
Yeah.
And I think also based on the maturity level, it really depends also what structure and processes organization need. I think we all agree that org chart titles, job descriptions, they have a value, but they should not determine how individuals or teams are really working together.
Correct.
And because we always say, I think would agree if somebody says, oh no, that's not in my job description, that's the reason I didn't do it. That's one of the worst answers you can get.
Or I'm the vice president of X team and I cannot work with the vice president of the Y team, right?
Correct, because coming back to what Sabine said is, if they don't see this as the most important team, if they would see the colleague from the other department as his most important team member, he would put more effort, he or she would put more effort in it to have a good working relationship, because everybody has experienced that you are the boss, doesn't matter what title you have. If you say this has to be done, in 90% of the cases, it doesn't mean that it gets done.
Yes.
Because it's not the military. So which means is nowadays, and with the younger generation, if you tell them you have to sell more next year, yeah, sure. Or you have to do this. It doesn't happen. It's not happening. So everybody knows that's the reason more organizations say, and I just had another one, their new vision statement, we want to empower teams. Sounds great, no? But then I ask how.
That's a tough question.
And then all of a sudden there's silence, no? How do you empower teams? No? Everybody would agree with that statement. But how do you do it? How do you know where you really stand? No?
Another insight I found was when these organizations are structured like the railroad companies, like hierarchies, like senior vice president, president, each one has to be given a P&L. And the moment you give somebody a P&L, and you give a P&L to somebody for a piece of the total solution, you get what I mean? Like, not the system, because the system is at the senior level. And I read somewhere that Apple has only one P&L. And that's the reason why they're able to get innovation in one group transferred to another group, because they're not fighting with each other, right? I mean, this was my idea. And like, okay, but why can't you fit it in an iPad? And companies just self-destruct themselves, just fighting across these P&Ls and silos. And that's the P&L you're trying to kind of maximize, thinking, now I'm going to be the puppeteer as the CEO, trying to keep all these senior VPs organized because I'm the only guy who has the information.
Correct. But
so when you get into teams and you start distributing knowledge and everybody has the knowledge real time at the same time, that's where collaboration actually starts happening. So I think it needs a total rethink how you structure such type of organizations or systems or.
Correct. I think that's there's only a small number of organizations where every manager gets measured on the overall company performance. Most of them get always measured on their individual team performance, which fosters exactly what we don't want to have. Huh?
Yeah.
And then you have the mindset, what? I'm in charge of HR. How can I have an impact on the bottom line? Or the other department? Nobody really feels responsible for the overall result. And nobody holds the other one accountable. You're not holding up your end of the bargain. Huh?
Yeah.
All right.
And nobody sees the full picture also, because data is power. You don't share the data.
Absolutely. And I posted and other posted in the chat some ideas how some organizations are dealing with it. We have next week also, if you're interested in the multi-team system and how to manage multi-teams. Still, I think value in the discussion in terms of what happens in multi-teams systems can also happen within the team, because you have your leader responsible for A and leader for B, and how do you manage the information? How do you create transparency? How do you create speed even within your own team? If there are, or are there any more remarks or so, maybe from the people who didn't say so much yet? Just looking at Christine, Julia, Donna, Trisha, Irina, and some more, where I don't see the names. Are there any more or any new remarks, topics? Because if not, I think we could continue in terms of the slides and what we thought. Then how can we deal with that as change pioneers? So exactly all the topics you mentioned, all the questions you had, and still the question how to find not a solution, but how to maybe give a framework or give something, not as a maybe tool for diagnosis, as Andreas says it so nicely, but a tool for dialogue. And by the way, I think that is then the solution. You need to have more dialogues about these things, either within your team or with across teams. But so maybe let's turn back on the question. What is the responsibility of a leader? And often what we saw, what I see, is it is understood only or mostly as the vertical or functional responsibility, which is already a lot of work to do, right? If you're the head of marketing or the head of something, you already are kind of hired for that normally. So even talking about working contracts, by the way, and then I mean, you're busy in doing your stuff. So this then often leads to discussions in leadership team meeting, which from my understanding are kind of staying quite operational. So it's about tactics, obstacle removing, quick problem solving, budgets, and so on, which is all good and which is all needed. But what often, at least in my or in our view, teams are missing out is this element of shared responsibility. Are teams talking enough together about what are our larger overarching goals and how can we accomplish them? How can we cross silos or cross departments? How can we co-create together? How can we not getting lost in translation in all the complexity and speed that we need? And how do we control and steer this? And maybe not with the old notion of controlling and steering, but maybe as a collective steering, as an organized, or even you could say a self-organized team. And there, this notion, what we found of shared team responsibility or shared responsibility, is often overlooked, or it is not clear how to do this. And maybe to the first question, what are maybe the elements of excellent teams or of this shared responsibility notion? We did a little poll here also in social media, and you see some of the answers, but more profound, we looked in a lot of team success criteria, and also we went through all the high performing team models that are out there. Mark mentioned the Heckman model for team efficiency. We looked at Lencioni, Katzenbeck, and Smith, and so on and so on. And we put our own practice and experience in this. And what we found out, that teams kind of must get two things clear in this vertical alignment, sorry, in this horizontal alignment. So they need to be clear on what needs to be achieved. So what are the overarching collective leadership tasks they have to do, and how do we get there? How do we get to team effectiveness? And I think happy to discuss, maybe not today, but I think this model could be usable for all sorts of teams and also maturity of organizations. But again, happy to discuss that. So looking at the what we see, that even these three topics here of are we clear on the direction, how do we coordinate ourselves, and how do we communicate and show up as a leadership team, even these three what things are not often very clear, or they are not even there. And looking at the four qualities of the how, as we call them, accountability, alignment, execution, and relationship, also there is sometimes, let's say, different opinions about that. So if we dive a little bit deeper maybe into this model, or the model we came up with, and there you see the different elements then on the third level, so to speak, and let's just go through a couple of them. Let's just pick a few. As I said, I don't know how many teams I have met where they could not where I could not wake up the team members at night and they could me clearly state the strategic overarching goals, the collective goals of the whole leadership teams. Yes, maybe on a certain level, but to really have it in a crisp, concise, and compelling way ready, I didn't meet so many. The topic of org capabilities. So not the individual competencies, but what capability does our organization need? Call it lean, call it agile, call it digital, call it automation, whatever. And how do we get there? How do we foster them? This direction I have also not seen in many teams. Sorry, just jumped around here. Then also KPIs and finance, maybe finance the more easy one, but the KPIs or OKRs, however you call it, and I know there's a difference, but even that teams are not often very clear on how do we measure ourselves and how do we measure success, especially, and in this notion I mean the collective team success, right? Then the topic of coordination. Are teams really able to fix overarching topics such as resource conflicts? Do they know the key people and how to engage them, how to foster them, how to develop them? Do they know critical end-to-end value streams? And do they know the critical interfaces, and do they act on them? So the coordination part would be that. And last but not least, on the what, the communication part, do we speak with one voice as a leadership team, or do we decide something, or the manager decides something, the CEO, and then we all go apart, and then I speak with different voices to my team? Are we good in, and we had this here today, are we good in creating transparency, not only in our team, but in the whole organization? And how do we collectively do this? I think that's the question, and not again individually, I in my silo create this kind of transparency and the other one creates this kind of transparency. And last but not least, how do we show up as a leadership team? Is it always the manager, the boss, the CEO who says or who takes all the time in the all hands meeting, or are we really showing up as a cohesive team with different roles and different responsibility? And this question brings us then to the how. And I mean, certainly the what and the how is interwoven. While you work on the what, you also work on the how. And I had just a couple of weeks ago, I had a leadership team in Austria, and it was a new leadership team. So almost all members were new. And so they really were thinking, okay, how do we set up our topics? How do we set up everything? And we went kind of, the agenda was basically what you see here on the what side. But while we were working on the what, we were also living the how, so to speak. And with the how, very interesting in terms of outcome. Do we know what our team roles and team strengths are? And I mean, not the team role, I'm head of sales or head of marketing, but what is my role here in this leadership team? What am I good at? What strengths can I bring to the table? And where do others respect me, so to speak? What are the responsibilities in this team again? And how do we commit, and how do we deal with performance levels if they are maybe different within the team? Do we openly discuss them? Do we give feedback to each other, and so on? Second, alignment. How is our discussion and co-creation culture? What methods are we using? How open and direct are we? But also, how is our decision-making processes? And do we even take decisions if the manager is not in or the CEO is not in the room? Are we allowed to? Are we empowered? And yes, how do we still inform then the CEO? Third topic, execution. How good are the leadership teams themselves in problem-solving methods? Do they use the ones that the organization has, or not at all? Is it more a problem finding, or is it a solution finding process that your leadership or your team uses? And what about escalation processes? So not always, or could be conflicts, but how do you constructively deal with them as a team, or what's your method behind this? And last but not least, but I think we heard it also today, how do we as a team take timeouts? How do we socially really connect beyond the context of work? Not that you have to do it, but again, maybe it serves for discussion here. But how good do I know the other one? How trustful are we? And one great way to do this is, do we learn from each other? I think Mark also managed it. No, Regina, you said you set up some peer consulting, so to speak, in your leadership team. And I would agree, and science would agree, that this is a very important piece to do this. So, and this is kind of our leadership model, and what again, and we want to use it as a way to discuss things, or the team can use it to discuss. And what you could do if you want to, and I put in the chat the link to the assessment. You don't even have to write us an email, as stated here on the slides. You could use it, you could play around with it, with the questions behind that, and maybe find some new perspectives, and maybe already spark some interest through the questions. What you will get is, so on the left you see the how the assessment kind of looks like, and how the questions are presented. So it's always statements where on a scale from 0 to 10 you say how much true you find the statement for you, and in the report that you get out of this, you can dive into the results, and we give some hints certainly in the report how this could look like. And yeah, how this could look like, because again, we said a tool for thinking, for your own reflection, maybe as a leader of teams, maybe a tool to get also the team opinion, the team perspective on it. And that could be a first step if you want to take team development as a process, and not just as a word of mouth, or how do you say it, not just as talking about it, but really walk the talk. You could use this to kind of have this dialogue and this kind of assessment with your team, find out maybe some spots where you say, really, yeah, we need to improve, or we want to look at them at least, and then together with us, or supported by us, or just by yourself, maybe come together for a classical team development offsite to create a clear path for team upgrade. And then something that we at least do with our clients, and what we strongly recommend, see team development as a process, not just as a one-time offsite. So how can you implement and sustain certain elements, certain things, certain reflection sessions, or Regina, as you did, kind of bring this into a process where you said it takes some time. How can you implement and sustain this? And what you always can do then, after 6 months, after 12 months, again, try to measure, maybe as a team together, with the picture and the perspective of the head of, but also the perspective of the team itself. Did we make any progress? Are we fast enough? Are we performant enough? And so on. And these are, I think, what you see here on this slides are these situations and or maybe observations that you maybe had in the past, that you maybe have or have right now. So, for example, Regina, if I get this right, you took over a new role, and maybe even new other players in your leadership team, right? So these are situations, and you did it as a pro, to think about, okay, how do I develop my team, and how do I also develop the functional responsibility and the individual on the team, but also what can I do to foster team development. And this brings me back to my statement, which I kind of always give by saying leadership is a profession. It's multi-level. It's crazy. You have to be a lover of team dynamics, psychology, sociology, and so on. but just you don't have to be. Some have really good gut feeling of just doing it and learning through experience. But I think that some kinds, this knowledge, this wisdom, these frameworks help. And again, if you could use any of the stuff we presented today, it would be great pleasure if you give us some feedback or just say how it goes and if you liked it. So before we kind of close this up, Andreas, I see you talking or.
No, I think there were a couple questions coming in.
Yeah, and you need to help me because I concentrated on the slides.
Right. There came a couple of questions. I wrote down three. I don't know if I paid attention. Was it cross-functional incentives was one, higher level agreement was the second one, and getting a sample report of the assessment was the third one, if I summarized it correctly. And if you want to address it, or you want me to address some of these, Bernd?
Yeah, I mean, the sample report, that's why we posted it. So it's really here a world premiere, so to speak. We have our minimum viable product of a team assessment in terms of this collective responsibility. So sure, I mean, take it, try it out, use it, show it to your team, or talk with us whether or how we can show it to the team and bring the self-perception and the team perception maybe together. So yeah, sure. I mean, the Change Pioneer wants also to get all these knowledge or these tools out of the ivory tower of the gray-haired team developers like Andreas and me. So please use it.
And I think that if you can take the assessment based on your own team or own organization, but also if you are a consultant, you can also take it as imagine as a member of the company you are working with, and then you can see what the results look like, and then we are happy to discuss it with you and get your feedback and input in what's great, what needs improvement or alterations. It would be great, and we are open for as much feedback as possible. And I think regarding the question, I think the higher level agreement question, I think if I don't know from whom this question was, and I think that's for me, it also relates to the other questions, the cross-functional incentive, well, that's cross-functional incentive, and I think we discussed earlier that everybody gets measured on the overall company performance, not the individual, is a cross-functional incentive. But how to get the high-level agreement, that's when I always look at that based on Patrick Lenzoni, who said it, first you have to start with trust. No? You have to create a trust level that everybody is really vulnerable, knows each other, and is willing and able to ask for help. And then then the next step is having healthy conflicts. I always say it's teams and movies have one thing in common. No? They both need a good conflict. And if the teams are able to really have tough discussions and really have conflicts and discuss it openly with the best for the team and the overall organization in mind, and not based on their own, that's when you then get a commitment, no? The next level. No? They're able to weigh in and fight over it, then they are committed to it. And then they can hold each other accountable. Yeah. And then everybody easily agrees on getting measured on cross-functional incentives or on company performance, and not individual performance. And I don't know if that answers the question, or if you want to add something to it.
Or more question than back to you. So what I see, especially also the high level of agreements, riskier, higher rewards, or getting rewarded or taking risk for, why should I take risk for collective responsibility if I'm head of marketing, and in my notion, this is certainly the safe to speak up within the team or giving feedback and talking about these things. But I think people, as a systemic coach, people are intelligent to behave in a system or in an organization like they behave. So I think there must be something like organizational safety, which means, I don't, or we as a team don't get punished even if we kind of take responsibility and fail, for example, or produce costs or something. So back to you, a question kind of, Andreas. I mean, you were the CEO of Nora System. Was this helpful to create this kind of organizational safety so people could take higher risk and knew for what they were kind of then getting bonus or were targeted to or targeting themselves? Because I think we had this, if the culture in the team number one is right, then it trickles down. But I could totally understand if teams who are in a, let's say, toxic system are not taking these chances or these risks.
Yeah, no, I think it's really the turning point for my team back then was that we really worked on the level 1 team. No?
Yeah.
So had an offsite and talked about trust being vulnerable, and we had and I had team members who know each other for 20 years working together, but they didn't really know a whole lot about each other and why they behaved the way they behaved. No? And there were some really emotional situations during this day, but afterwards this team was able to work together and trust each other and have a totally different relationship with each other, which then trickled down to their teams.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like if you know that the head of sales and the head of marketing, there's a normal conflict there, no? But if everyone in the organization, these two hate each other, and they don't like to work together, we know what the teams underneath do there.
Yeah.
They mirror that behavior.
Absolutely, that's what I meant, and they are then intelligent to do so, right? If the team number one is not really a high performing team, or however you call it, collective team responsibility. Yeah.
Yes, and if they're able to ask each other for help, no? That's what you did. It's a safe environment. Can I ask for help without being seen as a weakness? Huh?
Yeah, as a low performer.
Yeah. As a low performer, and we know if we get asked for help, it makes us feel good, no? Because somebody is trusting us that I can help you. It creates a totally different team environment. But the tough part is to get an organization and team to have these discussions, huh? And not feel like, oh, that's all too. That's really sometimes. I don't like to call it team development, and I always think like, we do some goofy kumbaya fun stuff together. Huh?
The climbing and so on. Yeah. All right. Any other impressions from you, from the audience, of either when and how are you thinking about team excellence, creating collective responsibility? Any remarks to the model?
Or do you guys think having an assessment like that is helpful?
I think we will see how many will fill it out to at least play with it. And again, I think that's the notion, right? I mean, try out if it works.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So the idea is you love to have the responsible team leader to fill the form out, or
it could be both. Right now, this is meant for, or the link I shared in the chat is meant for at least one person of the team. But it is also from the questions. It's a little bit worded as for the team leader. But kind of similar question we have to get the team perspective also in that, and then we can play these two perspectives together.
So either the team leader takes it or the entire team.
Yeah.
I think the most benefit, in my opinion, you get out of it if the entire team, including the leader, takes it, because then you get the full picture.
We highly recommend that.
So filling in the form is already the first part of the process with the team.
Yeah, if you want to call it like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you as the head of are already reflecting on this, and from there, I mean, you take it, right?
Right. And it's and ideally it should automatically trigger what I said, a discussion or a dialogue. Hey, did you fill it out? What did you think? Or because people talk.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if I just stupid question, but if the head of the team is filling it out and you're asking for the team span, the size of the team, and do you ask for the direct reports or also for the whole, say,
For
organization?
For the full organization. So we are differentiating there. How many directs do you have and what's the full span of the organization? Because topics could be slightly different regarding that.
Yeah.
But cool. So you are already looking into the questionnaire. Cool. Love it. Yeah. I mean, we are almost here on top of the hour, or how do you say, on the half hour. I mean, happy to. I really found this a very lively and I partially even like the slowness and the quietness of this conversation, which I'm normally not so good at. The people who know me can probably nod now with their heads. So I mean, let's see. We have different options, and I would love maybe because this really seemed to resonate, and I see even more comments coming in the chat. Happy to take this up again in a OD quarterly. So this is our quarterly kind of as you just witnessed, kind of sharing, exchanging, giving impulse sessions. You can read some more, for example, a blog post by Andreas about conflicts in executive teams, and or we certainly also as change pioneers have different leadership offers, and you can get a glimpse of our new offer, for example, on sustainable leadership. And or you contact us directly if you have any questions, and or again just remarks of whether or how we could continue such a session. I really loved it. I thank you for all the openness, for the trust, for all the remarks and questions and your experience that you have, because this is exactly our ecosystem peer approach. It's not just us wise guys here talking, but it's really kind of a co-creation with you. And thank you for that. Andreas and I took partially the lead a little bit in this, but I think we kind of managed then to organize this group process and role modeled leadership or moderation, and maybe also how not to do it. Andreas, any last words?
No, I think I can just echo what you said. Thanks for being part of it, and hopefully we were able to add value to you and your team, and that we were able to give you something in your hands which triggers thoughts, discussions, and enables you to work with your colleagues, your clients, and we would appreciate if we could be part of that.
And thanks for your open sharing, by the way, Andreas. It was really also great to have like an executive from a worldwide company to share so openly about also your frustrations and the problems you had. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody, bye-bye. Thank you. Take
Bye-bye.
care. And
Thank you.
happy to see you soon again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Very
Bye-bye.
insightful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Take care.